Alright, I finally have time to make another video. Let's see how I've been doing lately. Holy guacamole! It looks like I got a lot of follow-up questions to my last video, so this video will be dedicated to answering almost all of those. I'm going to split the video into two parts. Part 1 is going to be answering the questions formatted like, well, if that's true, then shouldn't blank also be true? And the second part of this video will answer the question I got the most, which is, why doesn't Charizard get hit by the reflected explosion? And for my loyal debunker followers, I have a video coming out today as well for the rotating lava cross. So let's hop right in. Question 1. What about the Frankline badge? Yes, many of Hero's spells, particularly his Hocus Pocus spells, are programmed based on item effects. Bounce is basically the Frankline badge. It works as you'd expect, with the exact same results. But there actually is a small difference between the Frankline badge and Bounce, and that is the radius of reflection. If I walk at a slow pace with Hero, normally his shield will block projectiles, but if he has Bounce, they'll get reflected. When Bounce runs out, his shield will take over, even though he's wearing the Frankline badge. Things will not be reflected until he walks faster. Question 2. If Little Mac parries the first hit of Flare Blitz, can he counter the explosion? Well, yes, but actually no. The explosion from Flare Blitz lasts for 3 frames, but Little Mac's counter takes 5 frames to become active. Therefore, it's too slow to counter the explosion from Flare Blitz. You can counter it from behind another player, though. Question 3. Actually, let's try this first. Bummer. The explosion still only lasts 3 frames. Question 3. Can Ness or Lucas absorb the explosion from behind another player? Yes, all energy attacks can be absorbed for health. Question 4. Can Villager pocket the explosion? No, explosions cannot be pocketed. You can only pocket projectiles, and explosions are not projectiles. Which leads us to question 5. Does Gardevoir have the same effect as the Frankline badge? The answer to this surprised me, because the answer is no. Gardevoir does not protect you from explosions, and sorry if I'm saying that Pokemon's name wrong, I have no idea how to say it. Now, you're probably wondering why this is the case, which is a great segue to part 2 of this video. Why doesn't Charizard get hit by the reflected explosion? I was trying to think of the best way to explain this, and then it occurred to me. Forgive me for answering a question with a question, but when have you ever seen the opponent get hit by a reflected explosion? The reality is that it's an expectation that the opponent does not get hit by a reflected explosion. It would be very weird if Charizard did get hit. That's the short answer to the question. But Mr. Bacon, a viewer objects, I'm pretty sure I've seen the opponent get hit by a reflected explosion.
Yes, I'm pretty sure I've seen that too, Mr. Bacon.
Well, you're both wrong, so buy some emergency supplies and duck and cover, because now we're going to talk about the arbitrarily quantified 5 different types of in-game. We're going to talk about explosions, in case that wasn't clear. First, let's clear up the misconception with Wolf's Reflector. Anytime Wolf's Reflector interacts with something, it hits everyone around him for 5% damage. In the ironighters clip, Wolf is equipped with the golden Mario Spirit, which gives him super armor, keeping his reflector active after the first hit of Flare Blitz. After the explosion interacts with his reflector, the reflector deals 5% damage to Charizard, or it would have been 5%, but the spirits equipped also buff the damage, and he ends up dealing 21.5%, making it appear as though Charizard got hit by the reflected explosion. In reality, this is just a very buffed 5% damage from Wolf's Reflector. King K. Rool's Reflector functions in a similar fashion. Oh, I forgot about Sora. Alright, I'll talk about Sora's deflector in a separate video. But I've decided to add one more part to this video, because I want to talk about projectiles, explosions, and their differences. First, what's the difference between projectiles and explosions? For the purposes of this video, a projectile must meet these two criteria. The attack has to be detached from the player, and it has to move or be summoned/cast. You can easily test to see if an attack is attached to a player by using Sora's counter. If the opponent gets stunned, it means that that attack is considered attached to the player. Examples include Min-Min's forward smash and Falco's down special. So these are not projectiles. The second condition is straightforward. The attack has to move or be summoned or cast like a spell. Examples include Snake's side special, Palutena's side special, etc. As shown with Snake's up special, not all projectiles can be reflected. Now, what happens when a projectile interacts with the reflector? The projectile's current direction is reversed. The reflecting player takes ownership of that projectile, and the damage output is typically amplified. There are also clear visual and audio cues that show when a reflector has been interacted with. And I believe this is what leads to the confusion. People see an explosion interact with the reflector because they see the same visual and audio cues, and they expect to get the same results as when a projectile interacts with the reflector. But you should not assume this, because projectiles and explosions are not necessarily the same thing in this game. An explosion can be attached or detached from a player. Some explosion attacks, like Snake's forward smash, are considered attached, and most, are considered detached. For the purpose of this video, there are 5 different types of explosions when it comes to reflectors. Aesthetic explosions, explosions that interact with reflectors, explosions that do not interact with reflectors, neutral explosions that interact with reflectors, and neutral explosions that do not interact with reflectors. An example of an aesthetic explosion is Snake's up special when he pulls out a new one. It explodes, but this is just for looks. It cannot be absorbed for health, and it does not hit anyone. An example of an explosion that interacts with reflectors is of course Charizard's Flare Blitz, and Snake's side special. And an explosion that does not interact with reflectors is Snake's up smash. What I mean by neutral explosions are explosions that hit both players. For example, Snake's grenade will hit both players and interact with reflectors. However, Snake's down special, his C4, will hit both players but does not interact with reflectors. You cannot protect yourself from Snake's C4 with a reflector. There's not much to say about these 3 categories, so let's discuss the remaining 2. Explosions that interact with reflectors, and the projectiles that produce the explosions. We've already established that reflected explosions do not hit the opponent. However, you can reflect the projectile that will produce the explosion, and then that explosion will hit the opponent. For example, in the clip I showed earlier, Fox reflects Snake's missile as it's falling down, so he takes ownership of it before it explodes, and then that explosion hits Snake, which is different than reflecting the explosion directly. Now let's talk about the interesting one, neutral explosions that interact with reflectors, and the projectiles that produce them. Snake's grenade is a perfect example, so let's look at this. A neutral explosion hits both players. Reflecting the projectile that produces a neutral explosion, like Snake's grenade, will give you ownership of that attack, meaning you'll get credit for the kill. But it doesn't change the fact that that grenade is still going to produce a neutral explosion. This can have funny results. If you reflect the grenade throw before it explodes, the explosion will remain neutral and buffed, meaning it's possible to reflect a grenade, still get hit by the explosion, and then take more damage than you would have had you not reflected it. And if you have a comically strong reflector like Kazuya, then you get to die comically early for reflecting Snake's grenade. Justice. In my next video, I'll talk briefly about Sora's deflector thingy, and I'll give some theories as to why they programmed explosions to not hit the opponent when reflected. If you learned something new, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.